12 American soldiers wounded. Prince Sultan Air Base, Saudi Arabia. That was Friday. But here's what nobody told you. That was the third strike on that exact facility in 7 days. 3 attacks, 1 week, more than 24 casualties at a single location. And Washington's response? Send 2,500 more Marines directly into the kill box. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and what I'm about to show you isn't just military incompetence. It's a trillion-dollar trap disguised as a deployment, and the math proving it has been sitting in plain sight the entire time. Let me start with the number everyone's ignoring, not the troop count, not the casualty figures. The number is this. America is now bleeding more money per week in economic damage than Iran spends on its entire military in a year, every week, and it's accelerating. That's not hyperbole from a defense analyst trying to generate clicks. That's the arithmetic of what happens when you let an adversary turn geography into a weapon while you're still thinking in terms of firepower. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz 4 weeks ago. 1/5 of global oil supply choked off at a 21-mile choke point, but that was only move 1. Saturday morning, Yemen's Houthis entered this war with a ballistic missile launch at Israel. Militarily, intercepted, no casualties. Strategically, earthquake, because now we're not talking about one strait, we're talking about 2. Hormuz in the east, Bab al-Mandeb in the west. The Houthis control Yemen's Red Sea coast, which means they control the 18-mile gateway between the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. The name literally translates to Gate of Tears. When Iran sealed Hormuz, Saudi Arabia rerouted everything through a pipeline to Yanbu port on the Red Sea. Oil loadings there more than doubled. The Red Sea became the only functioning lifeline for Gulf energy exports. And then the Houthis announced that closing Bab al-Mandeb is a viable option. 2 straits. If both become high-risk transit zones simultaneously, there is no alternative route for Middle Eastern oil to reach global markets without adding 10,000 nautical miles and 3 weeks to every voyage. Crude is already above $100 per barrel. American gas prices are approaching $4 per gallon. The S&P 500 just posted its 5th consecutive losing week, and this was before the Houthis fired their first shot of this conflict. You see where this is going? Because I saw it coming 3 weeks ago when everyone else was focused on strike footage. Here's what makes this scenario different from every other Middle East crisis you've lived through. In 2019, when Houthis hit Saudi Aramco facilities at Abqaiq, oil spiked 15% overnight, then normalized within weeks. Markets assumed temporary disruption. This time, there's no normalization timeline. There's no alternative infrastructure. The Saudis can pump oil through Yanbu pipeline at maximum capacity and still leave a 13.5 million barrel per day gap in global supply. That gap doesn't close with speeches or sanctions. It closes with one of 2 outcomes. Iran reopens Hormuz voluntarily, or someone forces it open militarily. Iran has already stated their terms. America has already rejected them, which leaves option 2. And option 2 requires exactly the kind of ground forces currently sailing toward the Gulf that Marco Rubio just promised would never be deployed. Now layer in what's happening to forward deployed American forces. Prince Sultan Air Base sits 60 miles south of Riyadh. It's a Saudi installation the U.S. uses as a staging platform for operations over Iran. Friday's attack involved 6 ballistic missiles and 29 drones in a single salvo. The air defense is there, Patriot batteries and THAAD interceptors are being overwhelmed, not by precision, by volume. Iran isn't trying to destroy that base with one decisive blow, they're grinding it down, salvo after salvo, forcing American systems to expend interceptors costing $3 to $4 million each against drones Iran builds for $50,000. The math of attrition warfare runs one direction, and it does not run toward Washington. The UAE has absorbed 398 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, and 172 drones since late February. Kuwait International Airport got hit, radar knocked out. Oman, a neutral mediator, took 2 drone strikes at Salalah port. Iran claimed they targeted a U.S. support vessel while respecting Omani sovereignty. Saudi Arabia is intercepting missiles over Riyadh. Bahrain is putting out fires. The entire Gulf Cooperation Council is taking fire. 6 of the richest nations per capita on Earth, all under sustained bombardment. And into this environment, the Pentagon is deploying 2,500 Marines and 1,000 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stood in front of reporters Friday and said the United States can achieve all objectives without ground troops. The war would conclude within weeks. These deployments, he said, are designed to ensure maximum opportunity to adjust to contingencies should they emerge. Read that phrase again. Maximum opportunity to adjust to contingencies should they emerge. That is not the language of a government that knows how this ends. That is the language of a government building infrastructure for a decision it hasn't made yet, but is preparing to execute. The 2,500 Marines in transit are that infrastructure. Here's what Rubio won't say. The 82nd Airborne doesn't deploy for hypotheticals. The 82nd Airborne deploys to seize territory. That is their doctrinal mission. That is what those paratroopers train for every day at Fort Liberty. You don't put them on transport aircraft headed for the Persian Gulf to sit in air-conditioned hangars monitoring developments. They're going because someone is planning to take ground. And while those Marines are sailing toward the Gulf, Iran just rejected America's 15-point ceasefire proposal. They issued their own 5-point counter. Their conditions? Complete end to hostilities, guarantees against future conflict, reparations for current damage, and Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, reparations, sovereign control over Hormuz. Those are not positions designed to reach a deal in 2 weeks. Those are positions designed to run out the clock while economic damage compounds daily. And it is compounding. The Hormuz crisis is not primarily a military problem. It is an economic weapon. And it is working. Every day that Strait stays restricted, oil prices climb. Every dollar oil climbs, American consumers pay more at the pump for groceries, for every product that moves by truck or ship. Congress is already pushing to suspend the federal gas tax because political pressure from approaching $4 gas is becoming unbearable. We haven't even hit summer driving season yet. The fertilizer disruption alone threatens global food security. Nearly 1/3 of global fertilizer trade transits Hormuz. The UN established a dedicated task force to manage humanitarian fallout from a single waterway closure. Crop prices are moving. Food insecurity is spreading to countries that have nothing to do with this war and couldn't find Iran on a map. Meanwhile, Iran's economy is being bombed into rubble. Over 93,000 civilian properties damaged. More than 1,900 Iranian civilians killed. Nuclear sites struck. Steel plants, power stations. Industrial infrastructure under sustained bombardment. But Iran's most effective weapon in this conflict is not a missile. It's a 21-mile stretch of water. Sending 2,500 Marines does not reopen that water. Aircraft carriers do not reopen it. F-22s do not reopen it. Nothing reopens that waterway except a negotiated agreement Iran has zero incentive to sign while bombing continues, or a ground invasion of the Iranian coastline that would make Iraq look like a training exercise. Trump stood at a Saudi investment conference in Miami Friday and called it the Strait of Trump. He laughed. The audience laughed. Gas is approaching $4 per gallon. 13 American service members are dead. The stock market just posted its 5th losing week. And the president is workshopping nicknames for the waterway bleeding his country's economy dry. Here's the trillion-dollar trap. The United States cannot win this war from the air alone. The air campaign has run for a month. Iran's most damaging capability, the Hormuz closure, remains completely untouched. The U.S. cannot reopen Hormuz without a ground operation Rubio just publicly ruled out. The U.S. cannot sustain a closed Hormuz indefinitely because domestic political cost of $5, $6, $7 gas will break any administration. And the U.S. cannot negotiate an end because the terms America offers are terms Iran already rejected, and the terms Iran demands are terms no American president can accept. Every option leads to escalation. Every escalation worsens economic damage. Every week of worsening damage increases political pressure to end the war on terms that look like failure. And 2,500 Marines on ships in the Persian Gulf do not change a single variable in that equation. They add cost, they add risk, they add targets for Iranian missiles already striking American bases 3 times per week. And they create logistical infrastructure for a ground operation the Secretary of State just promised the American public would never happen. When a government tells you something won't happen while simultaneously positioning forces required to make it happen, believe the positioning, not the words. The Marines are not the strategy. The Marines are the contingency for when the strategy fails. And every data point from the last 4 weeks says the same thing. Rising oil prices, falling markets, expanding theater, Houthi entry, failed negotiations, compounding casualties at bases that can't defend themselves fast enough. The strategy is already failing. The cost of that failure is measured not in billions but trillions, in evaporated market value, in energy costs crushing American households, in disrupted supply chains, in food insecurity spreading across 3 continents, in American service members being wounded at a Saudi airbase getting hit faster than it can be repaired. I've been analyzing conflict zones for over a decade. I've seen governments make catastrophic miscalculations before, but this is different. This is a war that cannot be won from the sea, cannot be sustained on land, and costs the American economy more every single day it continues. That is not a strategy. That is a trap. And 2,500 Marines are sailing directly into it right now. And here's the part that should terrify every strategic planner in Washington, but apparently doesn't. China is watching. Every Thayad interceptor expended over the UAE is one that cannot sit aboard a destroyer in the South China Sea. Every Patriot battery consumed defending Saudi airspace is one unavailable for the Taiwan scenario Beijing has been studying since 2020. The depletion happening in the Gulf right now is not just an Iran problem. It is a global deterrence problem. A Heritage Foundation report from January modeled what happens to U.S. interceptor stockpiles in sustained high-intensity conflict. Their assessment was blunt. High-end interceptors would likely be exhausted within days against a peer adversary. Some systems depleted after just 2 to 3 major salvos. We are watching that stress test happen in real time against Iran, and Beijing is taking notes. There's a reason Iran chose this exact playbook. They studied every American conflict since Vietnam. They watched the U.S. pour $2 trillion into Iraq over 8 years for an outcome that collapsed within months of withdrawal. They watched Afghanistan. They understand something Washington keeps forgetting. America can win every tactical engagement and still lose strategically if the cost-benefit ratio breaks the wrong way. Iran's military budget is $15.5 billion annually. This war is costing America more than that every single week in economic damage alone. Iran doesn't need to win battles. They just need to keep the strait closed and let compound interest do the rest. That's not warfare. That's accounting. And the math has been running against Washington since day one.